The alarm ripped me out of sleep before my eyes even opened. Red light pulsed across the walls of my cabin, and the floor shook so hard that my boots slid off the shelf and hit the ground. I grabbed the frame of my bunk and pulled myself up, my heart already pounding. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. I looked toward the door, expecting to see Ember standing there the way she always did every single morning, waiting for me to open my footlocker so she could choose a hat. She was not there. That absence hit me harder than the alarm did. In 3 years, she had never once missed our morning ritual. Not once. I pulled on my jacket and ran into the corridor, my boots slamming against metal grates. Sparks fell from a torn wire panel above me. The ship groaned like something ancient and wounded. I pressed my hand to the wall to steady myself as another shudder ran through the hull. Grace's voice cut through the alarm on the ship-wide speaker. Her tone was flat and controlled, the kind of calm that only comes from years of keeping people alive during disasters. All crew report to stations. We have taken a hit on the lower cargo deck. Hull integrity is failing in Section 4. Repeat. Hull integrity failing in Section 4. I did not go to my station first. I could not. I ran toward the cargo deck instead, my mind racing through every terrible possibility. If Ember was near that section when it happened, if she was hurt, if she was trapped, I would not be able to think straight until I knew she was safe. The corridor narrowed as I moved deeper into the ship, and the emergency lights flickered with every impact against the hull. Something out there was hitting us again and again, small pieces of debris moving at speeds that could tear a hole clean through metal plating. We must have drifted into a field of broken rock without anyone noticing, until it was too late. I reached the junction near Cargo Deck 4 and found Daniel already there, pressing his palm against a control panel that sparked under his touch. His face was pale, but his hands moved fast and sure. "Pressure is dropping in the cargo bay," he said, without looking at me. "If that door blows, everything inside gets sucked out into space, including anyone standing near it." "Where is Ember?" I asked. Daniel shook his head. "I do not know. Nobody has seen her since the impact started." I pushed past him and reached the reinforced door leading into the cargo bay. Through the small window, I could see the space beyond flickering with warning lights, crates sliding and crashing against each other as the ship tilted. And there, curled in the corner farthest from the breach, was Ember. Her wings were wrapped tightly around her body, and her eyes were wide with something I had never seen in her before: fear. She had not chosen a hat this morning. Now I understood why. Some instinct in her, some old and buried sense passed down from a species that survived a war we still did not fully understand, had warned her that danger was coming. She had skipped our ritual because some part of her already knew this day would be different. I hit the manual release on the door, and it groaned open just enough for me to slip through. The moment I stepped inside, a strong gust of air pulled at my clothes, rushing toward a jagged crack near the far wall where the hull had been punctured by debris. Emergency foam was already hardening around the edges, but it would not hold for long. "Ember," I called out, keeping my voice steady even though my chest felt tight with fear. "Come on, girl. We need to move." She lifted her head, and for a moment, I thought she might stay frozen where she was. Then she pushed herself up on shaking legs and ran toward me, her claws scraping against the metal floor. I grabbed her by the harness. We kept looped around her chest for moments exactly like this one, and we moved back toward the door together. Behind us, the cracked section of hull let out a sharp hiss, then a deeper groan. I did not look back. I pulled Ember through the door just as Daniel slammed the emergency seal shut, and the cargo bay went silent behind the thick metal barrier. "That was close," Daniel said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Too close." I knelt down and pressed my hand against Ember's side, feeling her heart racing beneath her scales. She pushed her head against my shoulder, and for a second, neither of us moved. Then another impact rocked the ship, throwing all three of us sideways into the wall. Grace's voice returned over the speakers, sharper this time. "We are still taking hits. Sensors are down across half the ship. Whatever is out there, we cannot see it clearly enough to steer around it. I need someone in the reactor room to keep the core stable manually, because the automatic systems just failed." I looked at Daniel. He looked back at me, and I could see the same thought forming in both of us. If the reactor lost stability while we were being hit by debris, We would not survive long enough to fix anything. I will go, I said. Daniel grabbed my arm. That deck is close to the breach. If the ship takes another hit before you get there, you could be trapped inside with no way out. I know, I said, but if nobody stabilizes that core, none of it matters anyway. He nodded, though I could tell he did not like it. Ember pressed against my leg, refusing to move away from me even as I stood up. I looked down at her and hesitated. Taking her with me into a dangerous section of the ship felt reckless, but leaving her alone after what she had just been through felt worse. She had already shown she could sense danger before it happened. Maybe that instinct would help us both survive what came next. Stay close to me, I told her, and she blinked in response, the closest thing to agreement I was going to get. We moved through the corridor together, passing crew members rushing in every direction, voices overlapping as everyone tried to keep the ship from falling apart around us. Sophie stood near a comms panel, shouting coordinates to Daniel through her headset, trying to map a path through the debris field using whatever scraps of sensor data still worked. I found Nathan near the medbay, kneeling beside a young crewman named Oliver, who was pale and holding his arm at an awkward angle. A support beam must have come loose and struck him during one of the earlier impacts. Is he stable? I asked. He will live, Nathan said, wrapping a brace around Oliver's arm. But I cannot leave him right now. Whatever you are doing it without me. Understood, I said, and kept moving. The reactor room was 3 decks down, and every step of the way, the ship shuddered under another impact. I counted them without meaning to. 6, 7. Each one closer than the last, as if the field of debris around us was growing thicker instead of thinning out. My mind kept circling back to one terrifying question. What if we were not just passing through a random patch of broken rock? What if something out there was pushing it toward us on purpose? I did not have time to chase that thought. The reactor room door slid open ahead of me, revealing a narrow chamber filled with humming machinery and blinking lights, most of them now flashing red instead of their usual steady green. The automatic stabilizers had shut down completely, leaving the core temperature climbing higher with every passing second. Ember stopped at the doorway and would not come further inside. She pawed at the ground and let out a low sound from her throat, almost like a warning. I do not have time to argue with you right now, I said, moving toward the main control console. The numbers on the screen made my stomach drop. The core was already past its normal operating range, and if it kept climbing, we would lose the entire reactor, along with everyone on board. I began working through the manual stabilization sequence, my hands moving fast over switches and dials that I had trained on, but never actually needed to use in a real emergency. Sweat dripped down my back as I adjusted the coolant flow, watching the numbers slowly begin to level off. Then the ship took another hit, harder than any before it. The whole reactor room shook violently, and one of the overhead pipes burst, sending a spray of scalding steam across the chamber. I threw myself sideways, narrowly avoiding the worst of it, but my sleeve caught the edge of the spray, and I felt a sharp burn along my arm. Ember let out a sound I had never heard from her before, something between a screech and a growl, and she rushed into the room despite whatever instinct had kept her at the doorway moments earlier. She pressed herself against my side, nudging me back toward the console. Grace's voice broke through the chaos again, tighter with urgency than before. Whoever is in the reactor room, we need that core stabilized in the next 2 minutes or we lose main power completely. If that happens, life support goes with it. 2 minutes. I forced myself to breathe and focus, ignoring the pain in my arm as I finished adjusting the coolant valves one by one. The steam still hissed from the broken pipe, filling the room with heat and fog, making it hard to see the readouts clearly. Ember stayed pressed against me the entire time, her body somehow steadying mine even as the floor kept tilting beneath us. 30 seconds left on the countdown Grace had given, and the core temperature was still higher than it needed to be. I reached for the final valve, the one controlling the emergency coolant reserve, and twisted it hard. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the numbers on the screen began to drop, slowly at first, then faster, until they finally settled back into the safe range. I collapsed against the console, my chest heaving, my burned arm throbbing with every heartbeat. Ember pressed her head against my chest, and I wrapped my good arm around her without thinking, holding on to her the same way she had once held on to me, as a hatchling too small to understand the world she had been born into. "Core stabilized," I said into the nearest comm panel, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. Grace's reply came through almost immediately, relief clear in her voice even through the static. "Good work. Hold there." We are still moving through the debris field, but Daniel thinks he has found a path clear enough to get us out. I looked down at Ember, who was watching me with those same wide eyes from earlier, though the fear in them had softened into something closer to worry. I reached up and gently touched the burn on my arm, wincing at the sting. "We are going to be okay," I told her, though I was not entirely sure I believed it yet. The ship shuddered 2 more times as Daniel guided us through the remaining debris, each impact smaller than the last, until finally, the shaking stopped completely. The alarm that had been blaring since I first woke up cut off, leaving a silence so sudden it almost felt louder than the noise before it. Grace's voice came through one final time, calmer now, steadier. "We are clear. I repeat, we are clear of the debris field. Report any injuries to medbay immediately." "Good work, everyone. That was too close for comfort, but we made it." I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding, and Ember let out a long, low sound that almost sounded like relief. I sat there on the floor of the reactor room for a long moment, my arm burning, my legs shaking, but alive. We were alive. That was the only thing that mattered in that moment. Nathan found me a few minutes later, and immediately began treating the burn on my arm, muttering under his breath about how I should have called for help sooner, instead of trying to push through the pain alone. I barely heard him. My eyes kept drifting to Ember, who sat beside me the entire time, refusing to move even when Nathan gently tried to shift her out of the way to reach my arm properly. "She saved your life back there," Nathan said, glancing at her. "If she had not pushed you out of the way of that steam, it could have been a lot worse." "I know," I said quietly. Over the following hours, the ship slowly returned to something resembling normal. Crews worked through the night repairing the damage to the hull and the cargo bay, patching the sections that had been struck during the debris storm. Grace walked the corridors checking on everyone personally, something she rarely had time to do, but the crisis had shaken all of us enough that small gestures like that meant more than usual. I did not sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the cracked hull, the steam bursting from the pipe, the numbers climbing on that reactor screen. Ember stayed curled beside my bunk the entire night, something she had not done since she was small enough to fit in my arms. I did not mind. I think we both needed the company more than either of us wanted to admit out loud. By the time morning came, the ship felt different somehow. Quieter, but not in a bad way. The kind of quiet that comes after everyone realizes they survived something they were not sure they would. I woke to a soft scratching sound at my door, the same sound I had heard nearly every morning for the last 3 years. My eyes snapped open, and for a moment, my heart caught in my chest, remembering the morning before, when that sound had been missing entirely. I got up and opened the door, and there she was, sitting exactly where she always sat, waiting patiently with her tail curled around her feet. Her eyes were bright again, none of the fear from the day before lingering in them anymore. I let out a laugh, more from relief than anything else, and knelt down to open my footlocker. She peered inside with her usual careful attention, examining each hat like it held some secret only she could understand. She sniffed at the bucket hat, considered the beanie, glanced briefly at the sun hat before dismissing it entirely, just like always. Finally, she reached out and pulled free the old fisherman's cap that Vasquez had left outside my door months earlier. The one she rarely chose but always seemed to remember was there. She placed it carefully between her horns, tilting her head until it settled at just the right angle, and then she looked up at me, with something that could only be described as pure satisfaction. I smiled, feeling something loosen in my chest that had been tight since the moment that alarm first went off. Whatever instinct had warned her the day before, whatever had kept her from choosing a hat when danger was closing in around us, it was quiet again now. The ritual had returned, and with it, some small piece of the normal life we all clung to out here in the vastness of space, far from anything resembling home. I reached out and adjusted the cap slightly, straightening it against her horns, and she leaned into my hand the way she always did. "Good choice," I told her. She made a soft sound low in her throat, something between a purr and a growl, and followed me down the corridor toward the mess hall, her new hat sitting proudly atop her head. Crew members we passed along the way smiled at the sight of her, some of them letting out quiet laughs, a few reaching out to gently pat her side as she passed. After everything we had been through the day before, that small moment of normal life felt like the greatest gift any of us could have asked for. Grace was already in the mess hall when we arrived, a cup of something hot in her hands, dark circles under her eyes from a night spent checking every inch of the ship for damage. She looked up when we entered and managed a tired smile at the sight of Ember's chosen hat for the day. "She really does not miss a single morning, does she?" Grace said. "Not unless something is very wrong," I replied, taking a seat across from her. Grace's smile faded slightly, understanding passing between us, without either of us needing to say more about what had happened the day before. She reached out and gently scratched behind Ember's ear, and Ember leaned into the touch, her tail swishing lazily against the floor. "We are lucky to have her," Grace said quietly. I looked down at Ember, remembering the way she had refused to leave my side in the reactor room, the way her instincts had warned her long before any of our instruments detected the danger heading our way. She was more than a comfort, more than a strange and wonderful creature who had chosen to make our ship her home. She was part of what kept us alive out here, in ways that went far beyond the simple joy of watching her pick out a hat every morning. I do not know what tomorrow will bring, or what dangers might be waiting for us further out in the vast, dark stretches of space we had not yet explored. But sitting there that morning, watching Ember tilt her head just enough to keep her chosen cap balanced perfectly between her horns, I felt something steady settle inside me. Whatever came next, we would face it together, the same way we always had. She finished her meal, gave one last satisfied look at her reflection in the polished metal surface of the table, and curled up beside my chair, the fisherman's cap still perched proudly on her head. Around us, the ship hummed quietly back to life, its systems repaired, its crew recovering, ready to continue on toward whatever waited for us next among the stars.